I am Jay Kidd. I am the creative director and lead designer here at Wraith Games. We're just outside of Cincinnati in a little borough known as Hamilton. And this is what I do. I make video games. A little bit about background. Founded the company back in 2005 when it was just me and a group of friends who were still in high school at the time. And ever since then, we've been pushing forward one step at a time, hoping that this leap will be the leap home. Wow, I was expecting more laughs from that one. Gotta crank up the stand-up vibe to 11 on that. So what I'm here to talk about specifically is entering the indie game market from a business perspective, because most of the time I've noticed with a lot of indie developers, you start off as a hobby, you want to do it as a business, but there's this sort of roadblock in that traditional business advice doesn't always work for indie development. And on top of that, sort of the secrets and tips that people gain, they just hoard them for themselves. They never actually disseminate into a place where it's actually usable by other developers. And I want to kind of lift the curtain on that a little bit. We're going to start off here. I'm going to ask a couple questions directly to some of you. Just feel free to chime in whenever you want. So who here wants to be an indie developer full-time? Cool, cool. Who here already is? Cool. Are any of you AAA developers? Who here wants to be? That's what I like to see. Just sort of keeping it indie like all the way. There's kind of this little thing within AAA development that you sort of notice if you have anyone who you're close with in the industry. It's kind of a soul-sucking prospect. It's a machine with too many moving parts, and if one of those parts gets broken, the machine keeps going anyway. And ultimately, it's kind of like building a Hollywood movie. Whereas I like to liken indie games to independent film. Of course, all of you probably know that, but this is just a thing that I say before I start talks. So yeah. So let's start here with gathering funds. So I've seen a lot of this within sort of the indie landscape where people are very interested in the idea of crowdfunding. And I think crowdfunding is an absolutely amazing tool, but not for gathering funds. Crowdfunding, I think, ultimately, what it does best is it helps to build a community around a project. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your crowdfunding campaign is successful or not, because you're able to leverage that into actual people who are interested in your project. Really, really special game to be able to get crowdfunded. And on top of that, it takes knowledge that you need to have that goes well beyond that of actually making games. Because to be successful at crowdfunding, you have to basically have a marketing background to do it right, or at least a keen eye for what makes other crowdfunding campaigns successful. On top of that, you have to be able to have an established fan base around your brand identity most of the time anyway. The most successful Kickstarters seem to be at least in the indie game space, seem to be games that are from developers who've already proven themselves. On top of that, you need a really good camera, you need a really good sound editor, you need someone to actually plan the videos, make a wonderful script. That's really daunting for people who most of their development budget, if they even have one, goes straight into the game. So, crowdfunding, amazing, wonderful, and I absolutely think you should pursue it. But know that it's not the magical money-making machine that it was 5-6 years ago. Now, what does that mean? How are you going to get money to fund your projects if you aren't going to crowdfund? Well, who has the answer here? Shout it out.
Sell your house.
Sell your house. Absolutely. By minimizing, by going into never sell your house. I mean, you can if you want to, if that's already part of your plan. But ultimately, the answer is really, really simple. You have to go to a bank. Banks, they're terrifying. They're these giant structures. They're always, all these people are going to tell you no all the time. There's loans to repay, things like that. It's terrifying going to a bank. But if you have the proper tools before you go in and before you say, hey, yeah, give me this money, you're going to find it's a lot easier than it might otherwise be, especially if you find the right bank. So I'm going to go just briefly touching upon something that I've touched on before when I've given other talks, and that is about making a concrete business plan. From there, we're going to talk about other sources of ways to get starting capital, and then we'll go into what to do once you've actually, got this capital. So, are there any questions so far? Yeah, cool. That's good to hear. So either I'm doing my job really well, or I'm doing it terribly, and I've lost all of you already. So, what you need to do to make a successful business plan is you have to first look at what's called a SWOT analysis. You have to go for your strengths, your weaknesses. Wow, did I really just do that? Mm-hmm. Who here knows what a SWOT analysis is? Save my butt real quick. Okay, give me 1 second. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about being over here on the other side of a computer. Just clickety clack. Opportunities and threats, absolutely. And this kids is why you don't ever do one of these with dyslexia, because memorizing acronyms is really, really hard if you have dyslexia. So yes, so your strengths. These are things that are internal. Both your strengths and weaknesses are. Your strengths are things that your team and you personally are really, really good at. It's stuff that allows you to sort of build up and make the best products you can and make the most money out of these products. Your weaknesses are things that are going to hinder you from doing that. A good strength with a team is maybe someone on your team has a master's degree in graphic design or something like that. Maybe a weakness would be that your programmer is really just sort of starting out. Maybe one good strength would be that you have a lot of connections within the industry. You know a lot of people already. Maybe a weakness is that you live in a place where it's sort of difficult to go out and promote your games. These are what you really have to worry about internally. Now, your opportunities are things that are sort of external. Same thing with your threats. Your opportunities are maybe you're very, very close to Louisville Makes Games. That's an opportunity that you have. Maybe you've had the chance to have a connection with someone who's at Sony, things like that. And that's where there's kind of a little bit of a crossover between strengths and opportunities and weaknesses and threats. But generally speaking, one is internal and one is external. So your threats are things like, well, maybe there are a lot of people already in this particular niche of my market. Like maybe you're primarily focused on iOS as opposed to other platforms, and you have all of these other people competing with you. Maybe you exist in a place where the local convention you go to has a very poor attendance. These are all threats that you might face. But you have to be able to realistically look at these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats and write them down, because you don't really have any sort of benefit from lying about them. But you have to be able to take these weaknesses and these threats and spin them around and explain in your business plan why they're not that big of a deal without sounding like you're dismissive of them. It's kind of a nice little tightrope balance that you have to perform. But once you have that done, you can use that as sort of a data point. You also then have to look at other game developers who you are sort of modeling yourselves after. When we were writing our business plan, we looked at Yacht Club Games, we looked at Bossa Studios, and we looked at the Behemoth, because they were companies that were, similar to what we were wanting to do. We were able to say, how many employees do they have? How long have they been in the industry? What is their structure like as far as running the business is concerned? how much money did they make starting out compared to now, what their growth looks like, how often they release games. And we were able to say, here are these 3 companies that we are sort of modeling ourselves after. And that shows that you have competence within the industry. You know how the industry works, and you're able to say, okay, here are banks, here's what these guys do. More importantly than just being able to give them raw data, though, you have to also be able to say, I know where these guys can improve. I know where their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. You don't want to, make a little mini SWOT analysis for them, but you want to be able to sort of briefly summarize these things. A SWOT analysis might be like 3 paragraphs on each strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat individually, whereas this is just like a little blurb, things like that. So after that, what you have to be able to do is sit down and make a timeline of where you think the business is going to be. You want to start at the point where you're like, okay, this is where we get our money. Or if you're already an established business looking for more money, you have to be able to say, okay, this is where we were previously, for maybe about 6 months or so, and then move on from there. You break it up into a 6-month period, a 1-year period, a 2-year period, and a 3-year period. At your 6-month period, you're saying, this is where I am now. This is where I will be very, very shortly. It's going to be a lot of minutia. It's like, oh, I'm going to start programming this game. I'm going to start doing the graphic design of this game. This is where we hire the sound designer for this game, things like that. Sometimes it might even be as mundane as, this is where we buy a standing desk because efficiency reasons. It's very narrow sort of things. Then you have your 1-year out. This is where you're sort of looking and saying, okay, a year might be a little far, but we're able to make some logical conclusions. This is where we're releasing our first project. Maybe, that's may not be possible for everyone, but for this example, this is where we're doing this project. This is where we're starting to do the marketing phase. This is where we contact publishers, things like that. Then you have your 2 years. If you thought making 1 year was kind of hard, 2 years is where it's like, oh, I have no clue where I'm going to be in 2 years. That's fine, though, because banks are mostly looking for you to be able to say, I have some sort of idea of where this business will go then. Oftentimes, you'll have to look at where other businesses were to sort of create this model for growth. And if you don't make these marks like spot on, that's fine. There's really no big deal on that. But you have to be able to say, okay, this is what we're doing with the money that we've received from this last project. This is how much money we're going to spend on here and there. And you're going to have to do a cost assessment. You're going to have to break down every step of the way. I have to pay these people then. I have to pay for this equipment then. I have to go to this event then. And the further you go out, the more sort of abstract that money gets. Then you have your 3 years. If 2 years was like, okay, this is kind of like writing a fantasy novel. I don't exactly know what's going on. 3 years is a Picasso piece. This is like, this is so abstract. I have no clue where I'm going to be in 3 years at all. It's because really businesses don't tend to know where they're going to be 3 years out. But by showing that you're pretty sure that you have a flow, you are going to be able to mark growth. You're going to be able to show realistically where you're not necessarily making so much money. That's what banks want to see. Banks want to see that you're at least kind of compensating for these sort of peaks and valleys that you're going to get. By 3 years, when you actually get to that point, your actual business progression will probably look very different. Now, you have to be able to show a lot of market data as well in these things. You have to be able to say, I know how many men play on Steam each month, and they spent this much money, and it is the single most soul-sucking thing you're going to be doing during this, because it's nothing but going to like indie game analysis on Google and finding people I trust to give me data. But you have to be able to show that you understand the market. You have to be able to say, okay, within Steam, Over 83% of players on Steam are male. They are between the ages of 18 and 35. They, on average, spend about $15 per game, and they play an average of 60 hours per week. Luckily, Steam gives you this data, and Apple gives you this data, and Android gives you this data. We have this sort of weird position that we're in that we are Nintendo licensed developers over here. Nintendo doesn't give you this data. Microsoft doesn't give you this data. They used to, back in the days of the Xbox 360. They loved touting their successes for the indie games program. Now they've been a little more lock and key. Sony has no problem with giving this data out. And they're, from what I've heard, pretty easy to work with. Nintendo, on the other hand, they're the ones who are like, no, you can have our data when you cry it from our cold, dead hands. Or I suppose cold, re-dead hands. Whatever. Hashtag Nintendo joke. Wow, I don't know if the resolution is that bad on this camera for just, I am the most, like, deadpan out here. Yeah, we got a couple people. Okay, there we go. I like to make this fun as much as I can. Mostly because no one likes talking about business plans. When we first started this business, it was really terrible because we had to go through I think it was a 9-week course from our local business development center. It was kind of numbing. You know, we had to listen to all of this information about how to make a proper business plan, about how to buy a property or rent a property. We had to go through all of this stuff. We even had to go through a credit class to try to tell us how to get proper credit so that the banks will take us seriously. But I encourage you all to go through something like that if possible. Because every area has a small business development center that you can go to and get more information on this. But I'll tell you, it's not for the weak of heart because it is the most boring class you will ever go through. And that's fine because it kind of has to be. Hopefully you'll have a teacher who has a little bit of a little sense of humor here or there, hopefully funnier than me. But it's going to be some serious stuff, and I'm only able to really touch on the cliff notes of it here. So that's your business plan. It has your SWOT. It has your projections. It has your industry analysis. It has the analysis of some people you want to be like. It shows who your management is, because you have to come up with a management structure as well. Forgot about that. All of this goes into a business plan that's roughly between 12 and 24 pages long. You also have to make it pretty. That sucks too, because not only do you have to make sure that it is well written at, I kid you not, a middle school reading level. And have you ever tried writing for a middle schooler? Raise your, by show of hands, who here has tried writing for a middle schooler? One person. Yeah, that's. Whew. I was typing up this thing and I typed in antiquated. I had the business class teacher come up and be like, no, you can't say antiquated. Beg pardon. Yeah, keep it at a middle school reading level. Last time I checked, antiquated was at a middle school reading level. Did middle school get worse around here or what? But no, so the reason for this is the sad truth to the whole matter. They're not actually reading the entirety of your business plan. They are picking and choosing little bits to read, and if it catches their attention, they'll read a little bit further and then they'll move on. They want to see that you're fairly competent. And each individual banker who looks at the business plan will be looking for different things. Meaning, you can't just slough it off. You can't just say, well, they're not really reading it. You have to do it at your best, but you have to do it in a way where it's not going to just sort of make their eyes roll back into their heads. And you have to make it pretty. You have to get familiar with InDesign, and you have to put tons of pictures of your games and tons of pictures of your team if you have one. And if you have a studio space, take pictures of that or pictures of you from events. Just plaster them everywhere because it's like, oh no, these guys know what they're doing. They were at conventions and stuff. You can even get stock photos. They don't know what your team looks like. Don't do that. I had a couple people do it, and it worked out fine for them. But it's something that scares me a little bit. You know, we ended up hiring a photographer. I'm like, $200, take pictures, whatever. But that's important to do. Now, can you do something on less? Yeah. But the more you put into this business plan, the more you're likely to actually get the funds you need. You also need someone approaching the bankers who's actually charismatic. Because we have someone on our team, he's our business director, his name's Thorne. He is very knowledgeable of the business side of things. He does our taxes, he does all of the other number crunching, he handles a lot of our contracts and things, he's the one who talks with our lawyer and stuff, and he is incredibly deadpan. He has this face where it's just like, massive beard, long ponytail, the guy's 6'4", he's intimidating, and he talks like this. So, I would like to present to you our business plan. See, in this year, we're projecting to make this much money. He always sounds kind of put off and kind of bored at the same time. He's also very sarcastic. Do not put him in front of a banker. If you have like a brother or a sister who is more charismatic than you, teach them to say the things and put them in front of a banker, because the perception of you is almost more important than the perception of the company. Because you have to come across as excited and interested in what you're doing, but also come across as someone who's not an idealistic ninny who isn't going to actually see the pitfalls. You have to have someone in front of these people who will basically say, hi, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm knowledgeable about. Here's this well-made business plan. Please give us money or we won't survive. So, who thinks that I've talked enough about business plans?
More?
Oh.
I actually have a question. Can we do a question now?
Yes, we can absolutely do a question.
You were talking about getting like the numbers from other companies, like how many they sold, how many employees they have. Where do you get that information from? Okay,
so there are some interesting sources for this. Valve does it directly. So Valve has like a corporate page. You can Google it, and they tout these numbers. They tout the numbers both internally and externally. So you can see how many employees Valve has. You can see how much money Valve makes. You can also see the type of people who are on their platforms, which is wonderful. For internal numbers, the sad truth is the best place to get most of that for other companies, like the Behemoth or Yacht Club Games, things like that, Wikipedia has a lot of that information. And it's updated from tax returns and things, because these people have to file this public information, and then other people look at it and put it on Wikipedia. Occasionally, you'll also get a really good article on Gamma Sutra, because a lot of developers, especially smaller ones, if you're trying to aim for those sizes of developers, will just say, okay, here's what we did, here's how many people we have, things like that. As far as bigger companies, that information is definitely Wikipedia level. Now, as far as like platform information, that takes a little more poking outside of Steam. For if you're doing like Sony and things, like for the number of people on individual platforms, I believe that the people who run Gamma Sutra, they also do IGF, and they do Indie Game Magazine and Indie Games, not Indie Game Magazine, Game Developer Magazine and IndieGames.com. They will often put out information saying, okay, Sony has this many people on these platforms, things like that. Both Apple and Google for Android do that in a very public way, though. You can just Google that up and say, okay, how many people are on this platform, narrow down by date. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as like Steam goes, and as far as like how many players are on the total platform, but if you wanted to say like how many copies did Shovel Knight sell on PlayStation 4 or something like that, like how can you get that information?
That information is usually very public, yeah. Shovel Knight's actually a great example, because that information, I do believe, is the second paragraph of the Shovel Knight Wikipedia page.
Okay.
Yeah. That's one of the things is these kind of sales. I hope someone's looking that up because I want to be right on this. But that's the thing is that with a lot of these games, the information is just one Google click away. You can just say how many people bought this on this thing. 9 times out of 10, it'll take you to Wikipedia, and it'll be right there.
Okay.
Which I know Wikipedia isn't always the most reliable source, but for like an actual business plan, it's more than accurate enough.
Okay.
And that's actually a very important thing you need to do. Whenever you type a piece of data into your business plan, cite the source. You should be citing everything, and you should explain what the source is. You have to say, Gama Sutra, I got this from Gama Sutra on this date. This was the date that the article was published, and you have to explain what Gama Sutra is. So we said that it was an industry publication. If you are looking at Wikipedia, anytime there is information on these sales numbers, it will actually tell you where they got that information. Cite Wikipedia's sources. Do not cite Wikipedia as a source. So, any more questions before we move on from this particular end? Yeah.
We have one from YouTube. What's your opinion of indie publishing? Now that Steam Direct has come out, would you consider going to a third party for PR and marketing?
Okay, so that's actually something that's really, really interesting. And this starts to delve into the personal, and hopefully I can sort of fishtail that back out into actual advice. Back in the day, who here remembers GamePro magazine? Good, good. GamePro magazine was great, and in 2010, they ended up creating an initiative called GamePro Labs. GamePro Labs was this really, really cool program in which they made a search for indie game developers. And this was a little before Xbox Live Indie Games came out when they first launched this. They put out a big search for independent developers to publish their games. They cast a net that was over 100,000 entries. And one of our games, Physics, was actually chosen to be published. It was amazing. It was this wonderful opportunity. We were chosen amongst 8 developers to be published by this magazine as they were going to do a physical release. They were going to help with porting. They were going to help with translation. It was wonderful. And this was back when that was very, very difficult to acquire, very difficult to do. They published 2 games, and then you may notice that GamePro magazine went bankrupt in 2011. The next year. So they only were able to publish 2 of these. Now, shortly after that, we approached, who here is familiar with Boom Studios? No, Boom Studios. Blitz 1UP. It's part of Blitz Games. Okay, no one. That's fire. They were a company that did AAA games. Blitz did for a little while. And then they created sort of an indie game publishing arm. We submitted to them for the same game, Physics. They loved it. We were about to start a contract with them, and they went bankrupt. Kid you not. They went bankrupt 3 months into our starting to talk. So we made a stance kind of at that point to sort of avoid publishers generally. Now, do I think that publishers are inherently bad? No, I don't, not at all. Give me a second. I'm going to turn this off because it is being annoying. It's terrible. Sorry about that. I thought it was off. So, do I think that publishers are inherently bad? No, I don't at all. But the question is, are you and your team comfortable with the type of deal that a publisher is wanting to make? Most of the time with these smaller indie publishers, their entire thing is, yeah, for the life of the game or for a certain amount of time, we would like to just take a certain amount of profit from the game itself. Sometimes they want creative control over that brand, though. And that's a bit of a problem. So okay, well, we want to be able to market or to profit on any anything within that franchise in perpetuity. Or we would like Wright to be able to take that intellectual property and give it to other developers and things like that. Even scarier are some of these companies want equity in your company. They want to be able to say, okay, we want control over this certain portion of your company in perpetuity, unless you buy us out, and sometimes they won't even allow you to do that. So what you need to do is you need to be very, very cautious. That's a perfect segue into sort of the next talking point, but I do want to ask for more questions first, if anyone has any on this particular subject.
How much money do you ask for?
How much money do you ask for? Oh, that is a great question. If you're going to the bank for less than $5,000, don't. Because they'll laugh you out of their offices. They're like, well, if you need less than $5,000, why are you coming here in the first place? If you need more than $25,000 as an unproven independent developer, don't do that either. In my personal opinion, I think $10,000 is the sweet spot. And ultimately, if you're a smaller company, they're willing to work with you so that your repayment, because they'll give you a certain percentage that you have to repay Jay knows words, totally. They'll give you a certain percentage that you have to pay additionally. Interest, they're interest. And so ultimately, you can usually get that for like 2 to 5% interest, being a smaller company. If you're doing like $10,000, your payments will probably be like $300 a month. Try not to push too much beyond that. Try not to push too much less than that, because banks are used to dealing with very specific types of businesses, and there's not a single bank out there who's used to dealing with indie games. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people aren't really wanting to go to the banks in the first place, because like, well, they're not going to give me money because they've never seen anything like me before. Not entirely true. They'll often have dealt with other software companies, things like that. But if an independent film can go to a bank, an indie game developer can. Just be very knowledgeable that too low you're going to be made fun of, and too high they're going to laugh you out of the office for a different reason. So about 10,000. Next question. Okay, so the previous question led into just this great thing. Hire a lawyer. I am dead serious about this. You have to hire a lawyer. If you are making any sort of deal with any sort of publisher, if you're making any sort of deal with a bank, take your loan terms. When you get the loan terms back, don't sign them immediately. Take them to your lawyer. If you are renting a space for your studio, take that to your lawyer, because you don't know. You have to go do this. And the cool thing is that they make lawyers who are specifically about small businesses. And the cool thing about that is usually they'll give you a certain amount of time at the beginning free, because they know that small business people tend to be poor because they're throwing all their money into the small business. The cool thing about that is that their rates are lower, and they're usually really, really efficient. It's get in, get out, here's your stuff. Have them create your contracts. Have them look over all your paperwork. Have them sort of represent you if there's any sort of copyright issue. That's very important. Get an accountant too. And I know, like, this sounds so daunting. You're like, oh, I have to have a lawyer and I have to have an accountant. This is crazy. That's got to be really expensive. They will only charge you based off of the service they provide. So it's not like you have a lawyer that you're paying all the time to keep them on retainer. This is just, no, this is the lawyer I keep going back to. It's someone who knows me, who knows these things. And the cool thing about that is going back to the business plan thing, you have what's called a a strategic team. Yeah, that was what it is. A strategic team is where you say, this is my lawyer that I always go with. This is my accountant that I always go with. This is my small business advisor that I always go with. This is the banker I always go with. And when you're presenting this to a bank, especially if the banker on there is the banker you're talking to, the thing about that is that they're like, oh, cool, you have these resources already lined up. One of the things about having an accountant is you can really mess up your taxes in the first few years if you don't know what you're doing. It might be beneficial to use TurboTax to go over your numbers the first time. Submit that to the accountant with your other receipts and say, hey, can you check this against the TurboTax? There are small business accountants who do the same thing as small business lawyers. They'll give you the first hour free, and then anything beyond that, they'll have a reduced rate for small businesses. You have to go poking around for those, though. A quick Google search of saying small business accountant in my area is usually enough for that. Though if you have a small business advisor, and like I said before, I really recommend you check them out. That's sort of a resource where you can say, hey, small business advisor, I'm going to call you Mark because my small business advisor is Mark. Hey, Mark, can you hook me up with a small business accountant and a small business attorney? Pretty please. And usually they're like, I have business cards here, because it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. A little side thing on this whole small business advisor thing. The best small business advisors are actually state employees. There are some small business advisors where you have to pay them money. They're worth it, but most of the time you can find one that's paid by the state, where they will give their advice to anyone who is starting a small business, because the Chamber of Commerce wants more money pumped into the city and more money pumped into the state. They're willing to pay a guy to help that happen. But yeah, so when looking at a publisher specifically, have a lawyer. Look over the contracts. Don't give up too much of your equity unless you really want to. Now, that might be a good question. How does a company have equity if they're just starting out? Well, that's actually pretty interesting. For about the first 3 years, if you're not making any money, the government looks at you personally. They will say, okay, we need your EIN. Who here knows what an EIN is?
Employee identification number.
Yep. Okay, so since less than half of you raised your hands, I'll explain briefly what an EIN is. An EIN is the social security number of your company. It is a tax ID code that is also used in other places. For instance, on Steam. If you were a Steam developer, they require your EIN to do your tax stuff. Same thing with Apple, same thing with Android. If you're a company, they'll take your social security number if you're just an individual. So what you're going to want to do is kind of decide what company you are, whether that be a sole proprietorship, meaning it's just you, whether or not you're an LLC, which is a limited liability company, or limited liability corporation, depending on your state, an S Corp or a C Corp, which are both the kind of big corporations, or if you're a limited partnership. A limited partnership is a little weird. It's basically an LLC made of LLCs. Generally avoid that. It's dumb and the taxes are weird. But if you're big enough, become an S Corp or a C Corp, it provides a lot of additional protection. It's difficult for, if you're an LLC, an S Corp, or a C Corp, it's difficult for anyone to sue you directly for anything stupid your company does. They're not going to go after you. They're going to go after the company. But 9 times out of 10, if you're starting one of these businesses, you're going to want to be an LLC. Because an LLC provides a lot of that protection, but it's also a little loosey-gooseier. You don't need a board of directors, for instance. You can just have a guy. You can just have a founder. You can have a board of directors if you want, but it's not necessary. Though, even if you're going to remain a sole proprietorship, and I beg you not to, because you could get sued out the wazoo. Don't do it. It's bad. if you're going to become any of those, including staying a sole proprietorship, you need an EIN. You do not want to be using your social security number for everything. You do not want this tax stuff tied to you personally, because then people are looking at your business taxes and your personal taxes all as one bundle. And if you take a hit, your business takes a hit, and if your business takes a hit, you take a hit. It's not good. We operated as a sole proprietorship without an EIN for about 5 years, and you want to talk about confusing. That was it. And there were some close calls as well, where it's like, well, I bought this pizza, but was it a company pizza or was it a me pizza? And they really care about that sort of thing. Because 50% of meals that you have while at work are actually tax deductible, just so you know. Pro tip. Also, if you're driving to a convention, that's also tax deductible. But not the point. Get an EIN. That's really important. Same thing with becoming an LLC. There's a fee for becoming an LLC. Depending on your state, it could be anywhere between like $20 and $300. I think in Kentucky it's $70, which is about the same as Ohio. There you go. So, any questions about the whole LLC EIN sort of thing? Okay, cool. Mostly because I can't remember why I brought up EINs in the first place. Does anyone remember? Nice. That shows that that was great. Okay, cool. So the thing is that yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's actually a good point to move on to something else beyond the foundation of the company. Generally speaking, if you have a team that's more than like 1 or 2 people, you're probably going to want to be in a place that's not your home, right? Who here dreams of having a building or an office somewhere where they can go in and make games? Oh, really? Only 1 of you? Oh, 2 of you. Okay. Any particular reason why you wouldn't want to go somewhere to make games?
Fewer distractions.
Fewer distractions at home?
Well, the home can be very distracting.
Yeah. Well, I was asking any reason why some of you wouldn't want your own space. Because I will actually tell you right now, the fewer distractions thing was absolutely why we decided to get an office. It was murder because like, oh, well, here's my Nintendo my Nintendo Wii back then. I also have an arcade cabinet in my apartment, so that's a problem. But yeah, you want sort of a space to come out and do on your own. So I want to briefly give you a few little tips about actually getting a space of your own. One of the first things is do not buy ever if you can avoid it. And that's actually a little hypocritical coming from our team because we've actually been thinking about buying a building. But it's one of the advices that you'll actually get from a small business development center quite often is that if you buy, generally speaking, you're down for at least 25 years. You have kind of a 25-year obligation to that space because you're having to repay this loan, you're on this mortgage. It can be pretty daunting. You're also responsible for anything that goes wrong. So if like there's a leak, that's your leak. If the walls are crumbling down, those are your walls that you need to fix. On top of that, because it's a business space, well, the city's going to be really interested in wherever you are. The city has inspectors who come in and say, oh, no, you need to go fix this. And they'll come in, every few months and be like, oh, no, this sink, it's not up to code. This, the entrance here, no, it's not disability accessible. You need to come fix this. The roof, no, there's a hole in the roof. You need to do that. And quite frankly, I'm very glad that they do that job. because everyone wants to work in a safe space, especially if you have clients coming in, if you have employees coming in, things like that. So if you're not going to buy, you're going to rent. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, like renting sounds like a colossal waste of money. And that's because it is, like, to be quite honest. You're throwing in a substantial sum of money every single month to these people, and then you're not even guaranteed to even have it past your lease. Very true. But the thing is that with that sort of additional waste comes a lot of extra security. You're no longer liable for all of this other stuff that you have to do. On top of that, because there's this extra buffer of protection, you can then have this sort of power to say, hey, landlord, things are leaking. Oh no, you refuse to fix it. Well, luckily, I have a lawyer. One of the things that you may want to approach is your city might have a small business development center to go with that nice small business development advisor. Oftentimes, this will come with what's called a small business incubator. It is a place where you can go where it's a whole bunch of offices and you can rent them out individually. Oftentimes, they're used by like lawyers, small-time doctors, prototyping people, things like that. But there's some really good opportunities for people who are in software as well. Oftentimes nowadays, software gets in there pretty quickly. So they're kind of used to dealing with software developers. Maybe not so much on the indie game side. We found that was a little weird when we first, when we got our place as well. It was just like, oh, you make games? How does games work? Do what? Make money? How? It's like they were speaking pig Latin or something. But the thing is that an alternative to that would be a co-op space. Co-op spaces tend to be cheaper, and they're just sort of big open spaces where you can pay a small monthly fee to come in, and you're sort of guaranteed a desk to sit at with you and your team and things, and you can work. One of the disadvantages to that is there are some more distractions. But one of the advantages to that is it's a lot easier to network with other developers, and it's a lot easier to sort of throw ideas back and forth. Both of those situations have pros and cons, but they're better than necessarily going down the street and saying, okay, I'm going to blow $1,000 a month on this space when I don't even know if my business is going to last 6 months. So those are definitely good places to start. Would I suggest staying in one of these environments beyond 3 years? Not really. But if you do not have a space that you're utilizing currently, a business incubator or a co-op space is definitely a great place to start. One of the things you will have to do, though, is get small business insurance. And you should be getting small business insurance even if you don't have a physical location. The second you put down your LLC, the second you get your EIN, you should be contacting a small business insurance advisor. These are people who will just hook you up with what fits you. When we came into our building, we were actually told that we needed a $1 million policy. And I almost cried. Because I was sitting down there and I'm like, but that's got to be expensive. It's $1 million. Oh my God. About 30 a month. Because these companies, they're like, no, businesses, they need a lot of liability overhead. They need the ability to pay out for a lot of different types of disasters, and they know that they're not going to be able to get a lot of customers unless it's a pretty cheap thing. It's crazy. I have friends who have like $300 a month car insurance, and it'll maybe cover a scratch, and here I'm sitting on a $1 million liability policy for the small business. And I'm like, it's $30 a month. It's like my renter's insurance. It's great. That's very important. And that's especially important if you have a physical space because, someone trips, it's your fault. Someone falls off a ladder, it's your fault. Someone doesn't like your face and punches it, it's your fault. Now this isn't like medical insurance. This is just like property and things. But at the same time, someone punches in your face, you're probably breaking the desk. You're gonna tumble backwards. It'll be awful. So it's really important to get that done. But you're probably thinking, okay, rent's like $300 a month at this studio space. It's crazy. And this insurance, it's like $30 a month. And then there's all this other stuff we have to pay for. We'll have to make sure we have at least $100 set aside for a lawyer and another $100 set aside for an attorney. And how do I pay my guys? How do I pay my team? You know, we have a lot of people working on these games. How do we pay them? Well, hopefully at this point, you've actually gone through the loan process or the crowdfunding process. There are some alternatives, though. There really are. One such alternative is what's called an angel investor. An angel investor might as well be called a unicorn investor because they don't exist. And they certainly don't exist for indie games. Just half a joke. What an angel investor is a mysterious rich person who decides to give you money because they like your face. And what ends up happening with that is, generally speaking, they want a bit of equity for the company. They'll say, okay, in exchange for me giving you $1 million, I want a 50% share in your company in perpetuity. You guys already know how I feel about equity. But at the same time, angel investors are almost always willing to give you more money just magically. Because, again, they're mysterious rich people who just want to throw money at these companies because they know it'll return on their investment. Now, they're oftentimes less sticklers, but they don't like what's called product development most of the time. That's when you're either manufacturing or developing a product itself. They don't really like people who are doing that. They want people who are doing platforms that allow other people to do product development and things like that. And they certainly don't like what's called the direct sales market. That's when you yourself are putting out a product and selling it. And indie games, unfortunately, actually follow under the direct sales market 9 times out of 10. Just the idea of a game going up on the App Store, going up on Steam, tends to be a bit problematic for them. That's why I say they don't really exist. But if you happen to find an angel investor, it's certainly willing to at least pick their brain. Because even if they're not willing to give you money, they might become a great mentor within the business side itself. Because these are people who have done, at least one very, very successful business. Usually they've had their fingers in like 10 or 20. So that's a great place to do it. Also, if banks are too intimidating, there are what are called credit unions. A credit union is basically if banks were communists. Wow, I'm so sad. I'm so sad. How they work is that every person who puts money in a savings account or a checking account gets a share of the company. Interestingly enough, an equity share. They get, like a stock for this company, and that stock actually ends up growing like any normal stock would. They also get to be part of the decision-making process for the credit union itself. Obviously, the more money you put into the credit union, the more say you get, because that's how stocks work. The thing about that is that they are generally smaller businesses, meaning they have less money to loan. Instead of going for like a $10,000, that's where you'd want to go for like $5,000 here or there. But they are much more willing to take risks with smaller businesses. They love small businesses, and they love helping you build your credit if, for whatever reason, you're turned away from a bank. Because banks want very, very good credit if they're giving you a business loan. Your EIN, that's what I was talking about before. Within 3 years, your EIN will start becoming the social security number for your business, and the business itself will start to gain a credit score, which is really cool. But only after you have money that the business is making, only after you're reporting taxes, only after the business itself is paying bills in the business's name. As it gains a credit score, that's when the bank will start checking it. Until then, Your first few loans from a bank or a credit union will be against your personal credit, even if you have an EIN and even if you have an LLC. These things are supposed to sort of cloak you from this sort of liability, but if your business has no credit, they're going to look at the next best thing, your personal credit. They want to see how you are doing. Cool thing about that, though, is a small business advisor might have a credit class that you can go take. A credit union will have credit building programs. They will say, okay, we're going to give you a loan of $5,000 that you can't touch. We're going to lock it down. And every month you give us $100 that goes towards repaying that loan. And then once that loan's all paid off, that's when we give you the $5,000. And not only that, every time you pay this loan, we count it towards your credit score. We report that. It's called a credit builder loan, and they are amazing if you don't quite have the credit in order to get your business off the ground. Especially because if you're willing to wait that long, that is $5,000 that you then have towards your business. And as soon as you go through that credit building process, and if you're making these payments, if you're making these payments consistently, they will absolutely be more willing to work with you on a loan. Because unlike a bank, banks take every transaction separately. They're like, okay, we've given you this credit card. Cool, your credit is up. Now we're going to check your credit for giving you this business loan. Cool. Now we're going to check your credit for this other thing. Credit unions say, you have a history with us. We saw that you did really well on paying that loan. Maybe your credit isn't the best still, but we saw you did really well. We're willing to trust you with a small business loan now. Or we're willing to trust you with a loan for buying a space. Don't ever buy a space, but still, if you decide to. But again, their money pool is a lot more limited. But that's kind of the pros and cons of it. You have to sort of weigh your things. That's also, there's nothing stopping you from getting loans from both places. Though remember, each loan you take out, as soon as you take out a loan, that immediately reflects on your credit. As soon as you take a loan, your credit dips back down. So it might be more difficult to get a loan from a second place. You also have to take a look as to whether or not you're able to repay these loans. If you're able to give $300 each time for different things. So any questions on that end? No? Okay, cool. So moving on, you have your space, you have your money, you're able to use this money to start paying your employees, probably not full-time at this point. I don't know if you have $10,000 and you have like 12 people to pay, that's really not keeping anyone full-time. But you have your insurance, you have your lawyer, you have your EIN, you're an LLC now. You are a business. That must feel really, really good, being a business, finally. But then you have to actually make product. You have to turn these projects into products. And that sucks. Because I don't think any one of us wants to look at a game as a commodity. I don't think any of us wants to say, yeah, it's just a thing you can buy. Because that's not why we're getting into games, especially not in the indie side. We make these things we're passionate about. We're making art. And that's one of the problems, is because just like in indie games, not a lot of artists really know how to sort of market themselves as business people. We actually have someone on our team, his name is Lance T. Miller. He's a professional artist, and he does a lot of character design for us. He's currently working on a book which is called Entrepreneurship for Artists. So I'm stealing some of his ideas. I don't think he's going to feel too bad about that. Interestingly enough, in the case study, Wraith Games or in the book, he has 3 case studies, and Wraith Games is one of them for how we were able to leverage, our artistic merit into actual business merit. But no one wants to think of this as in like a product, but you have to. You have to be able to market it. You have to be able to promote it, which is not the same thing. I wish it was. People lump them together, but it's not. You have to be able to actually release it, and you have to stay on point with development. So let's start there. Who here has had problems with actually completing a game? Yep, and if no one raised their hands, you're all liars. Because I don't know a single developer, indie or AAA, who hasn't just been like, I can't get past this. It's just so much work. There is this thing called the 70% mark. Who's heard of this? No one? No one's heard of the 70% mark? Okay, the 70% mark is this idea. I think it was created in the 90s. I don't remember who, but it's actually an industry concept that if you get to 70% of game completion, if you get like feature complete up to 70%, you basically just stop all momentum with a project. Like just brick wall. One of the reasons for this is because you get to a point where you're like, okay, it's almost done. I've been working on this for long enough. Time to do a pizza. That can kill a project if you're not willing to push past that. Luckily, self-management, team management, and project management are, if you can master those, it is not difficult to complete a game. So let's start with self-management. Oftentimes with indies, if you're making a game, it's just you. And even if it's not, you still have to keep yourself personally accountable. So what you do is you take all of what you have to do on the project. Wow, now I'm getting tongue-tied with this. Too many da-da-da-da. So what you have to do with this whole thing is say, okay, I know what I need to do on this particular project. You take it into small bits and put those small bits into chunks. Today I am doing X. Map out the next week. And then put that chunk into a box. And then you take these bigger chunks of these next few weeks and put those into a box. And so for the small things, it'll be like, okay, so today I'm just working on this running animation. Or today I'm just working on this particular piece of physics. Or today I'm working on this particular sound effect. And all of those things right there, if you work on the first few animation frames here, and then you work on the animation frames of a different object that's related the next day, and you do this throughout a week, that can be put into the box that you call that mechanic. Okay, this mechanic is done. Whether that be programming or sound effects for it or whatever in you do, that mechanic is done in a week. You then take all of those mechanics and put them into a larger box, a month, and say, these are all the mechanics of a particular part of the game. Then you can put those months. It will take months. I'm sorry to say, you know, it's sometimes very, very difficult to make a full-featured game that you're attempting to make money on in anything less than a year or two. You can do it. It's totally possible. But already, if you're having difficulty with project management anyway, your game will take a couple years. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you have a loan. Being realistic is kind of important when you're actually stepping into this. That was a little tangent. So you have these different segments, and you just take it one step at a time. You don't look at the bigger thing. Once you've completed a part, then you can look at a slightly bigger part of it. You can look at the entire box, but don't look too big because that'll get you overwhelmed. You just look very, very like little and move on. Now, what if you get stuck? That's when you can shuffle things around a little bit. Just make sure you don't do it too often. Self-control is important. So that's really how you sort of get personally motivated, at least as far as like deadlines and schedules are concerned. There might be other barriers for personal motivation. Like, for instance, you might not be able to find time within your day to even sit down and do this to begin with. Well, if you're not working full-time, why not set an hour aside a day? There's nothing wrong with setting an hour aside a day to do what you're doing. Set an alarm on Google Calendars or on Apple Calendar. Apple has a calendar, I assume. I wouldn't know. Set an alarm and say, okay, I am dropping everything I'm doing and I'm sitting down and doing this at this exact same time every day. every day, 4 days a week, because you're not a superhero. And you don't need to be. Give yourself time to take breaks. One of the worst things you can do is push yourself so hard that there's burnout. But you also want to be able to stay motivated for, longer than an hour. Keep that hour approach for maybe a month. Then move it up to 2 hours, especially if you're starting to work on a more definitive part-time or full-time basis. I do all my work full-time. So it's very easy for me to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and do 5 hours of this thing, because what else am I going to do? I'm stuck in this box. But it's when you're doing things part-time and when you're doing things from home is when it becomes a little more difficult. But that's why you have alarms, and that's why you have schedules. And that's why these schedules need to be written out. If you can take that little schedule you made and put it onto your calendar, even better. Because then your phone starts to go on the alarm, and you can look down it and say, I am to finish Crash's 5th frame of animation today in this hour. Cool. Also, if you're doing 1 frame of animation every hour, consider a different job. Just please. My example does not exist in the real world. Do more frames of animation than just 1 an hour, please. So that's about personal motivation. Before we move on, are there any questions about personal motivation? Cool. So, team motivation, team organization. One of the best things you can do is at the beginning of every project, have a big design meeting. Oftentimes within indie development, you have a lot of people who are capable of wearing many hats. You have people who are capable of doing art and programming and sound design and have the passion for all of them. But on an individual project, you need to be able to say, this is your job. You don't have to just give out one job, but you have to be able to identify what those jobs are. That way you don't have all of your team just drawing trees. You can be able to say, okay, Katie, I need you to program. Okay, Al, I need you to do music. That's what you have to do. Now what you can do is say, Katie, I need you to draw trees and do all the mechanic stuff for this particular weapon, programming-wise. Totally fine. As long as everyone has a clear sort of look at what they're doing. This is why a good design document is really, really important. Oftentimes, if you've been in a formal sort of programming or design or specifically like a game course of any sort, they will tell you about design documents. How many of you started a project and have just skipped the design document altogether? Yeah, how many of those same projects are the ones that you couldn't finish? A few hands. Little unusual, because I have never worked on a project that didn't have a design document that got anywhere. It's like, oh, there's a direct correlation between the lack of a design document and the lack of completion. And there hasn't been a single project that has had a design document that we haven't either finished or we're still working on and is very close to completing. A design document allows everyone on the team to know what is going into this game, whether it be aesthetically, talking about the aesthetics of mechanic or the aesthetics of visuals or the aesthetics of sound, whether it be aesthetically or narratively or just the nitty-gritty of actual mechanics or the nitty-gritty of actual UI, things like that. It's really important to have this all laid out in as much detail as possible. And it's important for everyone on the team to have read these. It's important also to update it. If you have a meeting and you make a change, you need to update this document. You can't just let it be the show Bible. Like, are you guys familiar with the concept of a show Bible in Hollywood? I need hands because I see some vague nods, but I definitely need hands. Okay, we have one hand. So, a show Bible is the design document of a TV series. It is the theme like the feel, the motivations of characters, and some plot synopses for a show. Like Joss Whedon has a famous show Bible for Firefly, which has 9 seasons worth of content. I'm crying inside. A show Bible is rarely updated because a show Bible, even if the show begins to change, the show Bible is still a way to go back to base. A game design document is not like that. A game design document has to update itself so everyone is always on board. Have previous versions of it. Use Google Drive if you can. That way they're like, every time you make an edit, there's a save for it. But you need to be able to say, okay, this mechanic isn't working, remove it, tweak it in the document, do lots of diagrams. Everyone's on the same page. On top of that, every single member of the team should have one of these schedules where it's saying, doing these things. Even if you're really, really sure that you're good at motivating yourself, having a schedule won't hurt. Having a schedule that's public won't hurt. That way other team members can see your schedule. Having a team lead who's able to step in and keep everything together is also really important. And if possible, that team lead should be the person who wrote the design document. Even if they're not like the person who's actually doing all of the mechanics. A design document, I think, is best when created as a community, when created as an entire team. But they should be the ones who are actually typing things out. They should be the ones creating these schedules. Because at the end of the day, team management is just as important a job as anything else. And they shouldn't be doing 50 million other things, because then their job as a team manager becomes lost. Not everyone has that luxury of being able to have a team manager who is mainly just concentrating on team management. So that's why you have them also be the lead designer, because they can sort of unify that vision all together. Now, one of the things you need to do with that, though, is every week, starting out, you should probably have a meeting. It doesn't have to be in person. It doesn't have to include everyone. It could be over Skype. It could just be a couple people talking. Your lead designer needs to be there at all times. That lead designer needs to be at these meetings to be able to keep things flowing and keep things together. Because it's all about not just accountability of oneself, but you have to keep the other team members accountable as well. You should be understanding. I mean, sometimes you have a baby. It's like, baby needs to be fed. Couldn't do this one frame of animation because baby feeding also takes an hour, apparently. So the thing is, though, that keeping each other accountable is really important. And keeping each other on schedule is important. And making sure that all these schedules go together is also important. So you should have the individual timeline, and then you should have the master timeline of events. You also then need actual project management. And you're thinking, whoa. If we're scheduling what everyone's working on at individual times, isn't that project management? No, that's team member management. That's employee management. Project management is best defined as management of the resources which are utilized in a project. Have a spreadsheet that has, it reinforces the list of whose responsibility is what, but keep a file structure that's readable. Date everything. Having the spreadsheet out and say this element with this date done by this person as the file name, and then logging that in the file sheet with that compound information is important. Because I've seen so many projects from other developers that have crashed and burned because they're like, well, we lost this asset. We just don't know where it was saved. We don't know where this is. And it all needs to be accessible by all the team members. You need to have like a public Google Drive, not public, you know what I mean, like a closed circle that is public to all the team members, so that all of them are able to upload things and download things as they will, as well as being able to then see these schedules and see each other's calendars and things, and have communication channels. You hear me touting Google quite a lot, but that's only because it's definitely the system that we use the most. We use Hangouts for a lot of meetings. Sometimes we use Twitter more than Hangouts. We've been trying to move over to Hangouts specifically. We've been using a master Google Calendar. We've been using Google Drive for all of our file sharing stuff. We have Google Docs, which has spreadsheets and stuff for all of our management. This is really important stuff to do. So, any questions on that front? No. I hope this is because I'm explaining everything adequately and not just because you're like, oh no, this guy's the worst speaker ever. We've already tuned him out. Okay. So that's how you sort of manage your project. That's how you sort of manage your time. And again, like one of the people said here, it's really important to be able to sort of be in a space where you're not able to be easily distracted. And that includes distraction from each other as well. There's kind of this idea of the bullpen, where all of your people sort of come in and work in this one unified space. And that's what we do here. We have a very, very long standing desk. And around the standing desk is where we all sit and, well, we don't sit, obviously. We all stand and work at the same time. We have really tall chairs just in case anyone wants to sit as well. But you'll notice most of the time you'll have headphones in. And that's because there was something to be said for this more cubicle style. It allows you to sort of isolate yourself. It depends on what your team's really going for. If it's more about free-flowing, kind of the hippie kind of spread of information, where you're not necessarily as worried about deadlines, a bullpen style works. If you're more worried about deadlines, we'll share information at the meetings. Office dividers and cubicles are kind of a way to go. We're halfway in between. We basically say, everyone around here has studio quality headphones so you can't hear each other, but you're around the same space if you need to. Sometimes that involves smacking someone on the back of the head because they're not paying any attention to you, but it's necessary. Also, a little bit of legal advice that I'm not qualified to give. Don't smack anyone on the back of the head. That's a lawsuit. So, what happens once you've actually made something? Well, that's pretty easy. Promote it. So, this is where it gets weird. You need a marketing budget of some sort. And you also need a promotion budget of some sort. Those should be kept separate. Think of your marketing specifically as flyers and ads and promotions to YouTubers and things like that. Whereas your promotion end, interestingly enough, would be you're traveling out to conventions, banners, standees, merchandise to sell at the table, demo tablets, demo computers, things like that. Keep the budget separate because they're both very, very expensive sometimes. And if you have one leeching off the other, since they're both equally important, you may not have room for both. One of the interesting things is the fact that for a while there, you were seeing a lot of ads from indie games, and you don't see that so much anymore. Like Google ads or Facebook ads, things like that. The reason for this is ads simply don't work the way they used to. It's not even just sort of an ad blocker thing. I've heard a lot of developers sort of talking about, oh no, ad blockers killed ads. But it's actually, there's a lot more research that says that it's the overabundance of ads. You can't get much information about a game from a banner. And when there's 50 billion banners vying for your attention, it's not really going to do much. Generally speaking, my rule of thumb is if you can keep $1,000 aside for advertisement. That includes printing out flyers as well. Not banners or standees or whatever, but that includes printing out flyers. And you're like, $1,000, that's crazy. You don't need to spend it all. You really don't. But every once in a while, you're going to have a tweet that you think is really good and that has gotten some traction. You know, you have 25 likes on this tweet, and 25 likes, that's something. You know, I know a lot of people are like, 25 likes, that's nothing. I see tweets are like 2,000 likes. Whatever. When you're an indie dev, you know, these 25 likes are kind of important. If you see something that's blowing up, give it $5. Give it $5, promote the crap out of it. Say, okay, this is clearly resonating with people. Let's make it resonate with more people. Same thing with Facebook, especially when you first start actually putting out the games. You're like, oh, this is our launch. This is our launch announcement. Promote that. Give it $10, $15. Have it run for a couple weeks. Because that first couple weeks is the most important time for your game. It's when you're going to be making your most money. If your game can't succeed in the first couple weeks, chances are it probably won't. There are obviously exceptions to that rule, but we keep looking at marketing data time and time again that suggests your first 2-week launch window will be when you get your most sales. Now, you're like, okay, $15 here, $10 there. How is that $1,000? Well, the thing is that you can then work on what's called paid promotion within the App Store itself. You can pay Apple occasionally. You can pay Android occasionally for some paid promotion. You can pay other sponsors for that. YouTubers are expensive to tell them, hey, here's some money, please play the game and show it off. They're expensive. That's why you should have $1,000 or so. One of the cool things you could do is then loop your sales money back in and get more than $1,000. But if you're working on your first couple projects, it's important to have a side. Now, maybe you can't afford that. Well, good news. That kind of advertisement is actually the least important type of advertising you can do. The most important type of advertisement you can do, the most important type of marketing, is social media marketing. Who here has Twitter? Good, good. Who here has Facebook? Good, good. YouTube. Like an actual channel for your stuff. Okay. Instagram. Okay. Okay. You should have all of them. And you're thinking, all of them, but it's hard enough to manage one platform. Can I tell you a little secret? You should be doing, on average, 6 tweets a day, 5 days a week. Who here does that? One guy. Okay. You should be doing, on average, 2 Facebook posts a day, 5 days a week. Who does that? You should be doing 3 Instagram posts a day. Who does that? You should be doing, if possible, 1 YouTube video a day. Now that hurts, doesn't it? 1 whole YouTube video. How the crap are you gonna manage to do all of this? Hootsuite, Buffer. I prefer Buffer over Hootsuite, mostly because it's better as a free product. You have what are called social media management applications. You also have what are called social media schedules. Oh, I love social media schedules. My favorite was done by a blogger named Indie Game Girl. She does a whole series on indie game marketing. And what she did was a calendar. And on this calendar, it goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at different times, 6 times during the day. Her strategy is that you engage with the hashtags on Twitter that you want to do. You have hashtags that you utilize quite often, like indie games, indie dev, made with Unity, game dev, whatever. And then when you actually have these things, you engage with them as much as possible, and you try every single week to make a new blog post. Who here's a blog that they blog about? Stuff, indie dev stuff. 1 person. You should try to blog. Even if it's just like a couple paragraphs every once in a while saying, yeah, I implemented this new piece of code and it was good and I liked it. Just something, anything. Every single day on Twitter, at a different time each day for 5 days, you need to promote that blog. You also need to be cognizant of events. You have Indie Dev Hour. Oh, the camera got really fuzzy. Are we having some sort of interruption?
You're fine on your end. You're fine.
Okay, cool. Who here is familiar with Indie Dev Hour? Okay, cool. The non-Twitter guy isn't, so it doesn't even matter because he's not Twitter. You should be Twitter, but yeah. So Indie Dev Hour comes up, I believe, it's once a week, right? Pardon?
Wednesday, I think, right?
Yeah, once a week. There's also Screenshot Saturday. There's Whip Wednesday, Work in Progress Wednesday. Engaging with these different hashtags as they become relevant is very important. There's also Follower Friday. That's where you promote people who are following you. A lot of people will just jam a whole bunch of names in their Follower Friday hashtag FF, and then like 5 different names. Do it one at a time. When I say one at a time, pick one follower that you think is cool to promote each week. Say, okay, Louisville Makes Games is following us. We think that they are awesome for these reasons, because they help promote indie games, because they help do talks like this. You know, anything that fits within your character limit to describe why you should follow them with the hashtag FF. Do that once every Friday. At the end of every day, you need what's called an engagement tweet. An engagement tweet is where you either ask a question or where you make some sort of quote. We have stopped doing these recently only out of sheer laziness. And because of this, our engagement with our audience has actually gone down a bit. It was noticeable. We also shifted from doing one blog a week to one blog a month, just because we've been spending more time doing development than promotion. Our engagement went down because of this. These are visible metrics that you can follow. That means that we have to double our efforts and do a blog every single week, and do an engagement post every single week, and do a Follower Friday every week, and a Screenshot Saturday every week. The idea behind this, too, is with programs like Buffer, they will actually look at your audience and sort out the best times to tweet every single day. And you get to set these tweets ahead of time. They're like Buffer, Hootsuite, there's another one as well. You get to say, on Monday at this time, this is what we'll tweet out. On Tuesday at this time, this is what we'll tweet out, etc. You do not have to be at your phone or at your computer and do this all the time. One of the things that if anyone has ever tried to tweet us, you'll notice sometimes I will have just posted a tweet and then it'll still take me 5 hours to respond. That is because I am asleep. We do 90% of our development at night. I sleep during the day, but my tweets go out during the day because that's how we have them scheduled. We have the free version of Buffer. So what that means is we're allowed to do 6 tweets a day, and we're not allowed to do the whole week. We're just allowed to do one day at a time. Meaning before I go to bed at like 6 a.m., I type out all the tweets I want to go out for the day, and then I go to sleep. What we also do is during the week, we tend to follow around 100 people every week. And then at the end of a month, anyone who hasn't followed us back, we unfollow. And that sounds almost cruel, doesn't it? It sounds like, oh, you're just kind of fishing for these things. Well, that's not the only way to do it. But what that does is it actually shows that people are willing to engage with you on individual levels. It would be cruel then if you didn't try to engage with them afterwards. You have to have a relationship with your followers, and you have to have a relationship with the people you follow. Twitter is worthless if you are not seeing what other developers are doing and say, wow, man, that's a great job. Hey, you may want to tighten up those pixels right there. You know, just the thought. Or, wow, you're going to be in Cleveland, we're going to be in Cleveland, let's get lunch. You know? Don't use social media as a way to just promote yourself blindly. You want to build a community. That's the difference between indie devs and AAA devs. Talk to everyone as much as you can. Tweet out on a schedule as much as you can. Make sure that people understand what the schedule is. Don't explain the schedule, but people will become comfortable knowing there will be always be a tweet at 8:45. There will always be a tweet at 11 o'clock. There will always be a tweet here and there. Engage with these hashtags. Don't just post about the hashtags. If you see Screenshot Saturday stuff, comment to other people. And the same thing holds true with Facebook. 2 posts a day. Instagram is weird, but you should always be taking screenshots and putting them on Instagram. Whereas with Twitter, you want to try to stay under 3 hashtags, 2 or 3 hashtags at most per post. With Instagram, you have to develop what's called a tag cloud. 25 of the most relevant hashtags that you throw on every single post. Look up tutorials on taking good photographs. Take pictures of your studio space. Show what you're working on. Go to different events. Take pictures. 3 posts a day. Follow people. Do the same sort of unfollow thing. The cool thing about Facebook is when you have a Facebook page, rather than sort of a Facebook account, we have a business page, you don't have to worry about just following people. That's good. One of the things, though, is you're actually going to have less engagement than, say, on Twitter, because it's less of a community and more of a, here's my business, do the things. As far as YouTube, well, if you're supposed to be making a video a day, what can you do? Now, this is a little hypocritical of us because we're still working on getting our YouTube going. But this is advice that we took from other game developers who were able to actually succeed in this area. We spend most of our time working on Twitter. We have a very big audience on Twitter. That's where we get our most engagement. Oftentimes when people come to us at conventions, they'll be like, yeah, I follow you on Twitter. It's really cool. So Twitter is really a great platform. So our YouTube knowledge is a little secondhand, but this is stuff we're really picking up on. Consider a monthly podcast with you and your team. Just have a mic and sit down and talk. Consider doing dev vlogs where it's like, hey, have a GoPro. Hey, it's us in the studio. We're handling this stuff. Do time lapses of your development. Do development streams. Maybe do just sort of a vlog that is kind of like an editorial about how the games industry is working right now. Try to do trailers and let's plays of the games that you're making. Make sure to vlog whenever you go to these events. It's going to be really difficult to try to do 1 YouTube video a day. It's going to be difficult to have enough varied content where people just aren't going to get bored. Maybe you just do like 1 video a week. That's still better than nothing. Whenever you do a video, promote it on Twitter. Promote it on Facebook. Whenever you go to these events, make sure you have business cards that have your Twitter handle and your YouTube handle and your Facebook handle and things where people can go and follow it. If you run a team, try not to say I a lot. You could generally say I in a blog as long as everyone knows the blog is written by 1 person. But try to say we and us. Try to keep that kind of statement constant throughout your social media. Always make sure that on Twitter and Instagram that you are following less people than follow you. That's one of the reasons why you always need to keep up with your unfollows. You need to mass unfollow every month. There are things called mass unfollow tools where you can go. My favorite mass unfollow tool is called Meshfire. No, it's Crowdfire. Meshfire is a way to help you engage. It will actually show you people who are relevant to you, so you can like people who are already following you or who you are already following. That way you can say, wow, cool, 2 Scoop Games is working on a really cool project. I want to go talk to them right now. And you can go and just like, hey, that's a really cool screenshot. Make engagement. Because if you are incapable of engaging with your audience, they're not going to want to engage with you. But that's not saying that you can't, or that not even that you can't, that you don't need to make tactical decisions. There's a fine line between saying, yes, we are a robot who tweets every day and follows people and then unfollows people who do not follow us back. Blah. That sounds mean. But when you take that and use it as a method to build your community and say, well, unfortunately, having all these people that we're following that don't follow us back is a detriment, you have to be able to make cuts when necessary. That is kind of the best way you can market yourself. Now, I'm actually kind of running out of time here because I want to do sort of a bigger question and answer segment as well. But I want to go briefly into promotion. Promotion is in person. It's when you go to events. My team tries to go to about 12 events every year. And I know what you're thinking. That is insane. Who here thinks that's insane? Yeah. And we don't just do Ohio. We do Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, Georgia, anywhere we can go. We're like, no, we're doing the thing. If you're starting out, go to at least one event every quarter. Go to at least 4 events a year. These can be a little expensive because you need to get a table. You need to promote yourself, even if it's just a prototype. They provide the table. I suggest getting a branded tablecloth. About $200, a little expensive, totally worth it, has your logo on there. I suggest selling t-shirts. Even if people aren't interested in the games themselves, if you make a good impression at your table, people will be interested in you as developers, and they might be interested in your next project. We give away stickers and buttons. We buy stickers in bulk for about $25. We get 1,000 of them, and we just give them out of our logo. We do the same thing with buttons, little pins. We have t-shirts to sell, $18. They basically pay for themselves. Buy a banner to go behind the booth, $300. Buy a standee, $100. A standee is like a little stand-up banner. Have $1,000 for equipment for your booth. Go onto eBay and buy used Amazon Fire tablets because they're dirt cheap and they work. Buy professional-looking tablet stands on Amazon for $12 each. Our booth only took about $1,000 to set up, but this is a booth that we can take with us at every single event we go to. That's important. And first and foremost, the one thing I can tell you is A, never work a booth alone. Have at least 3 people. That way you can take a break and go around to other tables and make friends with people. And yes, I absolutely mean make friends. These people that you meet at these conventions, they shouldn't just be your business acquaintances. We're all in this together. Make some friends. Go out to lunch. Have people that you look forward to seeing at every single event you go to. I know what I do. You know, we go to these events. It's like, hey, Cody, yes, lunch. Let's go get sushi like right now. Like, let's ditch this place and get sushi. It's important because we have to be able to have each other's back. But on top of not manning the booth just by yourself, but it's also important to be able to say, okay, when is this more about just the product? Talk to the people who play your games like people. Have a pitch. You know, say, hey, this is my game and this is how it works and I hope you like it. But also talk to them on a personal level. If you see a cosplayer, be like, wow, cool, I love Inuyasha. That's a great cosplay. How do you manage to do that? Talk to them like people. Because that's what separates us from the AAAs. That's how you get sales. That's how you build a community. That's how you get people who are legitimately interested in what your team is doing and what games you're going to make next. Make sure you don't let someone leave without a business card and a free sticker. Make sure they remember you. Make sure that if you try to keep them in mind. If you see them at another event, like, hey, weren't you at this other event? Great to see you again. We made some cool updates. Oh, see that you're really, really going with that costume again. Shishomaru this time? That's awesome. Don't be phony about it. Be legitimate. Sometimes you have to put on a fake smile because events can be kind of hard. But at the same time, if you're having a good time, it really comes through. Is the connection still going strong?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, because it's like looking at an abstract painting right now. So, events are kind of the most important place that you can actually go and make real connections with people. You then want to try to push these people onto the social media end. If you can keep engaging with them after the event, you have someone who isn't just a customer, but who's a brand. There's actually, yes, a brand advocate. Someone who's willing to say to their friends, these guys are awesome, their game is awesome, here you go. Podcasts. Go onto as many podcasts as humanly possible. Indie game blogs. Contact them. Request to be interviewed. The worst they can do is say no. We've been interviewed by, I think, over 50 outlets at this point. It's crazy. Because after a certain point, if you keep, whenever you tweet, like, hey, we were interviewed by this person, that's when you're able to be like, other people will be like, oh, can we interview you too? Absolutely. Podcasts and blogs, give away review copies of your game. On top of that, and again, I'm going to try to get to this so I can start answering questions. But on top of that, reach out to your local TV stations. Reach out to your local radio stations. Reach out to your local newspapers. We've been featured in local newspapers 3 times. We were featured in the Cincinnati Enquirer, in the Journal News, and in the Dayton Daily News. We just asked. Well, the Dayton Daily News, someone was at the event and just sort of started doing things. But afterwards, like, hey, just making sure we're actually going to be in because we were really interested in this. It would be really cool for promotion, stuff like that. Talk to them like people, too. We've been on NPR twice. The first time we asked, and the second time they just liked us enough. We're like, hey, you want to come back? Sure. We were on Fox just because we're like, hey, can we talk about our game on Fox? And they're like, yes. Yes, you can. There is no harm in asking. Especially if you're able to say, hey, we do some really cool stuff in this space. Like, for instance, our team works with a lot of local schools. If you can, reach out to education platforms. Work with some schools. That not only allows you to help people by sharing your experience, but it also allows for you to be able to add that to your portfolio. So, do you guys understand now the difference between marketing and promotion? Cool. Now, with that, I hope we don't go too much over time, but I want to answer everyone's questions. Ask me literally anything. Yes?
How do you pick and choose which conventions you go to?
That is actually a very interesting question. At first, there wasn't much of a pick and choose because it was the conventions that would have us. Now it's a little different. Now you can just sort of buy a booth. Because back when we were first starting, you either had to be a guest or an artist. And you'd either pay for an Artist Alley booth or be sort of invited to go in and just sort of sign autographs and whatever. And being an indie dev who sits down and signs autographs, having no clue, absolutely no one knows who you are, but since there are only 2 types of people who go to these conventions, it's awkward. Had someone who thought one of our friends was David Tennant. That was weird. As far as actually picking now, just start in your radius. We basically say, okay, 1 event a month, what's in our radius? And so we're like, okay, we're going to go to Vector because Vector is the only thing going on in the beginning. It's also student related, and we love students. We actually have some interns from EKU, so that was really cool. We're like, yes, students, wonderful. So we did that because it's kind of a convention dead zone. Also, that does help. So it fit a whole bunch of criteria. In the summer, it's harder because you have to be like, well, everything's expensive and there's 40 billion conventions going on. If you can get into a bigger convention, try the biggest, closest convention first. It usually helps. That's one of the reasons we're going to Indie Pop because they're in Indianapolis. It's like a 2-hour drive from here, from where we are currently. And there's like hundreds of thousands of attendants. And we're like, okay, let's do that. So really, it's just sort of best to feel it out. One of the things that we love doing is we do this every year, about 4 times a year. We make a tweet and say, what event do you want to see us at? And then lots of people are like, AMG, PandoraCon, Indie Pop. And we're like, we will go to all of those. But that only really helps after you've been going to events for a few years and when you know that a lot of your followers go to these sort of events. So, hope that helps. Next. Your questions sustain me. Don't make me go hungry.
Do you think there's any like bad platforms? I mean, just like if you're making a game, you know, do you just try to get it on as many platforms as possible, or I mean, just things of that nature?
Okay, so this is a really, really good question. We're Wii U developers. So, little aside, I think the Wii U is a brilliant console, and people won't understand how good it was until the Switch is huge, which is pretty huge now, but I mean, like, 10 months down the line, people are going to be like, man, the Wii U is really good. It's what happened with the GameCube. Here's the thing. Microsoft won't give you a dev kit anyway. You can try, they won't do it. They're also difficult to work with. Luckily, if you're wanting to go on the app side of Microsoft, you can turn a normal Xbox One into a dev kit for the app side. So it's kind of an incomplete dev kit. Sony, you have to have an in, but they'll just give you a dev kit. If they like you, they'll give you a Vita dev kit, they'll give you a PS4 dev kit, whatever. Nintendo, they vet you. Well, at least they used to. It's still a difficult process to get in with Nintendo now, but back when the Wii U and 3DS first launched, they did thorough background searches. They also had to have you sign a whole bunch of paperwork. They had to go through and make sure that you were developer enough for the whole process. It was the most intimidating thing we've ever gone through. And they finally approved us, and they actually gave us an individual representative to work with, and then told us that we had to buy the dev kits. And I'm not legally allowed to tell you how expensive they are, because that was under the NDA, but they were very, very pricey. The Switch dev kit, on the other hand, is cheaper, but they're having some difficulty rolling those out. The list of people who are authorized to get a Switch dev kit is very, very short. We're on the waiting for approval side on that, though they are probing into us. I would say that the cost of getting on 3DS at this point is expensive because the dev kits haven't gone down in price. I would say the same thing for Wii U. The thing is, though, that once you buy a dev kit, if you're not renting it, we bought it, you'll have it to do whatever game you want. So if you already have one kicking around, who does? Let's be real. Unless you were already doing it, 5 years ago. Avoid Wii U and 3DS, even though they're still active. It's worth getting interested in the Switch now, but you still have to pay. It's $500. There's no NDA for that price. That was public knowledge. Gamasutra actually reported on that a while ago. It's $500 dev kit, but it's a long waiting list, and they're still not entirely sure how they're rolling that program out. If you can get in contact with someone at Sony, do it. If you can get on Steam, especially now with Steam Direct launching, do it. It's not really about getting as many platforms as possible because each platform has their own sort of engine side problems. Though if you're working with Unity, that's been limited a lot. Unreal's a little bit more difficult, and HTML5 is also kind of squicky about it, but it generally works. The general rule of thumb is port to as many platforms as you are comfortable with porting to, as long as you're capable of not as giving all of them the same amount of attention as each other. Next question. Yes.
I got a question from YouTube. It's kind of a two-part question, so let's start with the first part.
Okay.
What are you currently working on? What are you currently doing?
That is actually a longer question. We are currently working on 6 games because we have 12 employees and 2 interns. We are working on finishing up Collapsus, which is a puzzle game that recently won a couple of awards. We won SlyDB's App of the Year award, and we were also chosen as the best game at GDEX from CLE Tech. That was the game that Nintendo actually wanted on the Wii U, which was actually really cool. So we're working on Collapsus. We're hoping to finish that up sometime here very soon. We're working on an 8-player fighting game called Burst Lancer. It's about knights who have rocket-propelled drills, and they fight each other. It's all about it's one-hit kills and uses iframes and pain states. We're working on a free runner called A Giant Freaking Cave Worm Run. We're hoping to have that done in September. We have physics that we're still working on, the game that we were working on in 2011. It's on kind of a hiatus. We're porting it to VR. It's going to be a VR experience now. It's a first-person puzzle game set in space. We have a game jam game that we're working on for Kentucky Fried Pixels right now, which is called Motion.Rest. We're also working on it's kind of like a block sliding game. If you've ever played Pokemon Silver and Gold, it's kind of like the Ice Cave kind of a thing, but an actual game instead of a mini game. Our last year's Kentucky Fried Pixel game, Raid Arkanoid, we're remastering that and getting it ready for tablets. And we're also making a sequel, like an actual non-game jam sequel called Raid Arkanoid 3000. Because Raid Arkanoid, for a while, we put it in a physical arcade cabinet and brought that to a whole bunch of events. The arcade cabinet was 500 pounds. It was a mess to do around, but it was good enough where a lot of people were like, well, if you ever make a sequel, put that on the Wii U and Switch. And so that's what we're doing with that. We're working on an unnamed horror project that I'm legally not allowed to talk to because we have a whole bunch of people on NDA for that one. We're on pre-production for an unnamed platformer called Milo. We've been tentatively calling it Milo's Big Adventure. That won't be the final name. We're working on another game called Jetpack Hero. We have our fingers in a lot of different projects, but that's because we have 3 team members working on each individual project, and there are different stages of development. It's important to stagger your stages of development. That way you're not working on 50 billion things all at the same time. So next question. The second part to that.
The other part is what marketing and promotion approaches failed?
Oh, that's actually traditional ads absolutely failed. It is like I was trying to say before. Just if you're just putting out a banner ad on a whole bunch of websites, or if you're using like Google AdWords. Though Google AdWords is cool because if you put in $100, they'll give you $100 of free ads. That's the first time you do it. It's worth doing at least once. But traditional banner ads and things like that, and YouTube pre-roll ads and stuff, they fail every single time. We also put a couple ads in a couple magazines. No, they did nothing, like at all. We ran a thing in Indie Game Magazine a while back for physics, and we didn't even get people going to the social media. Like no one cared at all. So traditional advertising, like traditional commercials and banners and stuff, dead. Just, I would say avoid unless you can do it cheaply enough where it's worth experimenting with. But those would be the ones that you want to stay away from. Okay, next question. Yes.
How does mobile marketing differ from console and PC marketing?
One of the interesting things behind that is the marketing approaches aren't really that different. It's just more your verbiage. It's more like your call to action and like specifically what type of words you use. Because the thing is that with these individual social media approaches, you're really only promoting within the people who already follow you or friends of people who follow you. So you're already working within your own built-in market. Conventions, the cool thing about conventions is they attract all sorts of different types of people. So it's really about how you go about wording what your product is. For instance, Collapsus, to a lot of people, it kind of looks like kind of a Candy Crush kind of a thing. I hate Candy Crush. You can quote me on that. Whereas we got some people who said that it reminded them of the anti-Candy Crush or Tetris in reverse. Somebody even called it, and I quote, a real ass kicker. We played up the difficulty of the game to try to reach more of a core audience of people who were tired of casual puzzle games. And that was, this game is being released on both mobile and on PC and Nintendo platforms as well. So ultimately what we did was for each platform, we sort of catered more towards wording it related to people who actually play those platforms. Like, for instance, mobile has a 93% female player base who tend to play on average 30 minutes at a time, whereas PC has a predominantly male player base, 93% male, and they tend to play for 3 hours at a time. Whereas consoles, it's tended to be a 50-50 split, and it tends to be like an hour and a half at a time. So you just have to be cognizant of the types of players and word accordingly. Next. Yes.
So, well, while you're developing some of the projects that might take 1-2 years at a time, what are some ways to kind of bring in a revenue stream while you get those big projects finished?
Okay, that is a very good question. And it's a question we get a lot because a lot of indie dev teams, what they will do is they will do contract work. And our team has seen many other teams die because of contract work, because they get locked into just doing contract work, not having enough time to do their own games. What we have tried to do ultimately, besides seeking external funding, because you can, like, to be honest, for a little while you can just sort of live off the loans until you release a project. What we've been doing is release a few smaller projects. Even if it's just like on web, something to give us a little bit of revenue while our other team members are working on bigger projects. Surprisingly, T-shirt sales and other merch sales have been very helpful for a lot of other developers. We've just been really starting our T-shirt thing, but there's been some success there so far. On top of that, what really works too is if you can sort of hire yourself out as a consultant. This is the lesser of two evils, because consulting makes a lot of money, but you don't have to spend as much time as like doing contract work. Because again, I think contract work is soul sucking, and I know there will be a lot of people who disagree with me. Say that's fine, but if I ever had to be a freelancer again, I will straight up murder someone. Just because it distracts, and it also makes it seem like you'll never get to do what you do. But you'll get less gigs consulting, but you end up making more money on it, and you then have more time to do other things. But definitely the small game, big game approach seems to work the best, but only if you have loans that you can sustain yourself off of for a little while first. Next question. Yes.
How do you develop a good elevator pitch?
Okay, so how you develop a good elevator pitch. Okay, so first off, who here knows what an elevator pitch is? Good, everyone, great. Almost everyone, close enough. So the thing is that you have to boil yourself down into your core components. What we did was we did an assessment where everyone on the team wrote down 5 things, 5 verbs and adverbs and adjectives that they thought described us as a team. And so everyone did that, and then we went up to the board and we wrote them all down. And then we put stars next to the ones that multiple people chose, and they got to buy into the next round. And so we took everything that wasn't starred, and out of the list, everyone then chose 5 things out of that list and wrote it down. And then we put everything back, or no, it wasn't 5, it was 3. 3 things out of that list that was just put up on the board, and then wrote it down. And then after a few rounds of this, we were able to distill our brand into 5 key points, only 3 of which ended up actually surviving, which were quirky, clever, and charismatic. That's how we describe us. So then when you're writing your elevator pitch, you want to look at the history of the company, if the company has a history. You want to look at your future goals, and you want to look at what you're currently doing, all through the lens of those descriptors. So you never say, oh, we're a quirky company who does this. But for instance, our elevator pitch for going to actual investors is, hi, I'm Jay Kidd from Wraith Games. We're an award-winning independent developer and Nintendo licensed developer behind some of the greatest games you've ever played. We also work very, very hard to make Wow, this is what happens. You try to rehearse it a little bit. We try to focus on accessibility while maintaining a green, paperless studio. So that's what we do. The thing that you need to know, though, is you have to have different elevator pitches for different situations. You need an investor elevator pitch. You need a convention elevator pitch. You need a colleague elevator pitch. You need to have these different sort of levels, and they'll all be a little different from one another based off of their interests. But once you have something written down like that, you just practice it in front of a mirror and practice it with your team members as much as you can. Yeah. Taking also when you're making this elevator pitch, leverage that information to create a bio on your website. Sort of expand it from being one paragraph to expand it to like 3 paragraphs. Also, have a stopwatch. It should be under 10 seconds. We always do a stopwatch test whenever we're doing it. And yes, we've actually had these exercises here at the studio. I know it sounds super dorky, but it's what they taught us to do at our investment class. So yeah. Next. Yeah.
What about the same question but for a specific game? And also, would you elevator pitch? How do you develop an elevator pitch for a specific game? And also, do you recommend for or against comparing your game to other games when you're describing it to people?
Okay, so this is one of those things where you kind of have to read the room. Generally speaking, we have actually found for Collapsus, which is the game we've promoted the most because it's the one that's gained the most media attention. What we did was we actually decided not to do an elevator pitch. We instead went with what we call the spiel. It's like 10 elevator pitches that have been sewn together that we just give out in rapid fire. So the thing is that if you are working on an actual elevator pitch for a game, and actually I'll kind of lightly explain why we decided to go against the whole elevator pitch idea, is we are demoing this game to people. Meaning, start with a pitch that's more of an elevator pitch to get them to the table. Though generally speaking, I'm like, hey, come over here and play Collapsus. Don't worry, you'll lose. Stuff like that. I try to challenge their gamer cred to get them over here, like a carnival barker. In fact, we've spread the pitch around the studio for people who give it, and it describes taunting them like a carnival barker to get them to the booth in the first place. But once they're there, allow them to experiment, and then you can start giving some facts about the game. Because on average, they're going to be there from between 5 minutes to a half an hour. We've had some people linger by the booth for about 2 to 3 hours, which was weird. You have a good game then, I guess. I don't know. Either that or all the other games at the event are really bad. But you have a lot more time to fill at an event, and so an elevator pitch is a little less useful. Now, if you have to have one out in the wild, just sort of distill it down to describing the mechanics in a way that a layperson would understand. Don't assume that they're gamers. To other games, I'm not inherently against it, but only if you know your audience. If a person, I think comparing it to other games is most advantageous when it is a person that you are assuming plays some games but not a lot. If they're completely a layperson, it won't do anything. Just talk to them like you talk to a middle schooler, I guess. That's what we generally do. Like, hey, it's really cool. You get to click on blocks and they go away, and that meter starts to go down. If it's an expert player, say, yeah, we have a pretty unique resource management mechanic that's centered around risk reward. But to the person in the middle, we're like, yeah, it's kind of like Tetris in reverse, whereas Tetris is additive, Collapsus is subtractive. That sort of thing. It's beneficial, but only if you know who you're talking to. Otherwise, if you don't have that sort of general idea, avoid it. Next.
With all the games that come out, on the Steam and on the App Store and stuff, I mean, what do you do outside of marketing and promotion? What can you do to separate your games from the other games? Because
this is going to sound this is the worst answer that we can give to this sort of question. We just make good games. And basically, a lot of, like, I'll use Collapsus as an example again. A lot of Collapsus was designed with frustration and other puzzle games. Though technically, we ended up, the first prototype of Collapsus came out a year after Bejeweled, I think. We've been working on this for a while as a prototype. So it definitely beat Candy Crush to the thing. But a lot of the changes we made to it were in direct response to how we particularly hate a specific game. The thing was that ultimately, what you have to do is you have to make a game that you would buy. A lot of people ask you, like, well, would you play your game? Of course I'd play my game, but would you buy it? Would you buy it, like, would you honestly sit down and buy this game just from how it is currently? And so you have to make a game that you'd want to make, while at the same time knowing that games are products that aren't in a vacuum. Play test the crap out of it, and whenever you play test, have a clipboard, silently observe play testers live. Don't give them advice or anything, and look at where they're failing, look at where they're getting frustrated, and then have them fill out a questionnaire afterwards, asking them what they liked about it, disliked, and things. The questionnaire isn't as important as the raw data that you're getting from observing them, but what that does is that allows you to say, I am making a game I would buy, but I'm also cognizant that other people are enjoying this because of choices we made from direct market research. Do this at conventions, too. You can't always have a piece of paper right there, but watch how people play your game at conventions. I feel that conventions, like currently we've had over 50,000 people play Collapsus at events alone, which is a lot of people. That's crazy. So what we did was we actually used it as sort of a way to make the game better, more than even just marketing. So you have to make that fine line. And a game that is well marketed, that is also well polished, will stand out. There's a little luck there, certainly, but at the same time, all you can really do is market it the best of your ability, as well as making a product that you are absolutely proud of, that you know other people do enjoy because you've seen them enjoy it firsthand. Okay, more.
You had another question from YouTube?
Yes.
How far into development do you generally feel comfortable marketing a new game to customers?
I never feel comfortable marketing a new game to customers, ever. You will never feel comfortable doing it. When should you start marketing? Not to pick apart the question in the most condescending way possible. As soon as the game has a concept. The indie game shelf life is a weird thing, the sort of life cycle of an indie game. And if you don't start getting the idea of your game out as soon as you have early screenshots, it's not going to go anywhere. You want to make sure that your cycle isn't like so far that people lose interest. But if you can start promoting from pre-production, these are these sketches, these are these early models, these are some ideas about mechanics. If you start at least talking about it early on, don't make it your primary focus. Try to focus on your other projects if you have them first. But start making little inklings about the game. Start mentioning them in passing at events. That's when you really need to start promoting. Now, when should you start promoting them as heavily as you do your big games? That is when you have enough content to make a trailer. And you'll have enough content to make a trailer, I'd say probably at about 50% feature complete, which is probably about 25% content complete for most games. So you'll have most of your mechanics done, well before you have most of the content done. So as soon as you get that trailer out, get a trailer out early that looks polished, that won't give the game a bad name. Promote that, and then start ramping up the promotion. Feed me more questions.
There's another question from YouTube. It has to do with the Switch Dev Kit. Can anybody sign up to get one of those?
Okay, so technically yes and technically no. So Nintendo, like I said, they're a weird, multi-headed animal. What you have to do is the best way to guarantee that you will have a Switch dev kit at some point is sign up on the dev portal. They opened up the dev portal the last year of the Wii U's relevance, basically. Insert joke here about the Wii U's relevance. I like it. I think it's a good console. But basically last year they opened it up where anyone can sort of apply without being heavily vetted. So it's like developer.nintendo.com. Just Google Nintendo Developer Portal. Sign up there. Once you get approved for that, you'll have the ability to sign your paperwork as well as to purchase a Wii U or 3DS dev kit. The Switch dev kits are not up there yet. They will be eventually. And that's why I said Nintendo's a weird multi-headed animal. If you have a game that's nearly done or a few games that are nearly done and you have history as a developer, you can just email third-party at nintendo.com. Just search for Nintendo third-party publisher email on Google. It'll come up with that. You send them a pitch letter. And they will say, okay, well, we need information about the game and we need information about you as a developer. And so from that point, then they start the vetting process like they used to with the other things. So anyone can send an email. Will it take a while for them to get back to you? And will they probably say no? Absolutely. They're vampires. They're crazy. But having your feet in both pools is a good idea. Signing up for the developer portal and then waiting, as well as emailing them from a third-party perspective, is also good. Just have an expectation that you probably won't land it, but there's no harm in going those routes. Okay. Come on, there's gotta be more questions before another YouTube one pops up, because I like to answer the YouTube ones, but I like seeing your guys' faces. So. Yep.
Do you have any stories that you can share, either with maybe if you've dealt with publishers in the past or partners that either you've gone to or have come to you in the past? Do you have any stories you can share with that? How they might have went or anything like that?
I wouldn't really. Oh, sorry.
Does that question make sense?
Kind of. I don't really. I wouldn't really say I have stories. Especially from a funding perspective, it's usually walk into place, ask for things. From a publisher perspective, like how we fell into the whole Nintendo thing was really weird. Mostly just because we applied and then they didn't answer us for 6 months, because little did we know they were basically giving us the background check equivalent of a cavity search. There was nothing they didn't know about us when they were done there. Really, the sad thing is most of the time these things are really mundane. You just send an email off or you give a phone call. Sometimes you have to just sort of do a blind call or a blind email. Making sure you have a good pitch. If ever I'm invited back to do another one of these, I should probably talk about like giving a good pitch email. It's a very important topic that I didn't get time to talk about here. So really, no, it's just there aren't many good stories. Just because it's like, oh, I sent some emails, and then some people said yes, some people said no. Okay. Guess I'm going hungry. Guess no one's sustaining me. Okay, cool. So I guess that's it.
That's it.
I guess. If you guys like what I'm all about, request that I'm brought on again. If you would like to hear from some of our other team members, request to Louisville Makes Games that they're brought on to talk. I would definitely like to come back and do this again if you guys thought I was helpful and interesting. It has to be both, helpful and interesting. So if that's something you'd like, request.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Where can we? Where will we see you next? What's your next conference that you're going to or event?
The next convention we are going to is Indie PopCon. Indie PopCon will be at the Indianapolis Convention Center the 7th through the 9th of July. And then after that, I believe it's OGDE, though there's a month in between there, so we're probably going to slot something else in there. You know, not OGDE, GDEX. They changed the name a couple years ago. So, yeah. So love to see any of you there. You know, stop on by. You know.
I think some of us will be at GDEX. Also, some of us are going to be at BitBash in Chicago.
What time? What date is that?
I think it's August 12th, but I'm not 100% positive. Yeah, August 12th.
Okay, because our August is open, so we might slot in there if possible. We will definitely be at both Lex Play and GDEX, and then there's a couple other things too. Basically, if there's an Ohio, Indiana, or Kentucky thing, we're generally there.
And thanks so much for participating in Kentucky Fried Pixels too.
It is a lot of fun. I love game jams, and I love the sort of loosey goosey kind of atmosphere. It's creatively inviting. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I like anytime like any of us are on Twitter or whatever, we try to like go do Kentucky Fried Pixels. It's awesome, just best game jam. Because we attempted to do Ludum Dare for 4 years, and every time it's just like, nope, this isn't getting anywhere. We have other things to work on. But Kentucky Fried Pixels, it's so much fun. I love it.
Here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a great night, Jake.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just waiting for you to boot me. I guess I'm leaving the call in. Bye.